Yeah, I'll be called gay. I will be called gay because I'm late. Right, hello everyone. I'll just tweet everything out. You got 7 people, and YouTube is really naughty. They're lying to me about my numbers. So I'm joined in I guess I'd say like a one-off stream because I don't do much streaming on this channel anymore, as many of you will know, and I'm joined by a guest who he was frequent in uh, our circles. And he's been, um, he's somebody who I watch as well, and I thought it'd be great to get him on because he has a pretty good insights into the current state of the right and everything. And he's interviewed. I mean, he did the interview recently with a sort of chap who knew Jonathan Bowden, and I highly recommend that to go check out that interview because it was really really interesting. And it's the Iron Duke himself. Good evening.
Oh, good day. How are you going there? The Jonathan Bowden interview was with Eddie Butler, who was one of Jonathan Bowden's few real friends. And I've had people who know a lot about Jonathan Bowden, far more than I do, who've said they learned stuff on that stream. So, yeah, it was a good stream, although it was mainly a good stream because Eddie Butler was such an excellent guest rather than anything I did.
Yes, and because we're going to be talking about the progressive cons, as people might be watching, guess the title here is we're going to be talking about people who wear the sort of skin suit of conservatism and who are absolute disgusting leftists. And I don't know about you, Iron Duke, but I have more respect for the Owen Joneses, like the people who are just open leftists and wear it. Something about if you're going to sit within conservative circles or label yourself a conservative, and then just behave as a leftist, it seems really slimy, underhand, like real parasitical sort of person would do something like that.
Well, I think your title, Progressive Cons, is exactly right. I mean, as we were saying just before the stream started, a progressive conservative is an oxymoron. You can't be both.
No, you can't. And it's it's a phrase which has entered the English language through. It has its origins in the 20th century. We were talking also before about Canada and everything, because the Conservative Party out there have, if I remember, I think it varies on province, but you have like the Progressive Conservative Party and everything.
I would just say, sorry to interrupt you, that like I've got a few Canadians on my Discord, and I sometimes do old Commonwealth streams with Canadians and Australians. And so far as I can work out from talking to Canadians, most real right of centre Canadians have abandoned the Conservative Party and are now pinning their hopes on the People's Party of Canada, I believe.
Yeah, I know from a couple, I think, because I'm on your Discord, and I remember a lot of the Canadians saying that I guess you could say the last sort of competent conservative, whether he's good or not, it varied on individual opinion, but the last competent one who sort of understood what it meant to be and did was it Mark Harper?
Something like that.
Yeah,
but certainly the modern, this guy who's in charge now,
Erin O'Toole.
I think he sounds like a bit of a tool. So I don't think many actually right-wing Canadians, and as we found out recently, there still are some. I don't think most of those people actually support the Canadian Conservative Party anymore.
No, I mean, I've talked on this channel and in other people who follow me on Twitter and everything about the sort of discussing the Carl Schmitt sort of the political concept, which for many people will say, "Oh, well, it's very basic, isn't it?" Well, it is, because it's basic, but a lot of people, especially on the right, forget this. But it really comes down to friend and enemy. And if you're a person on the right, a genuine person on the right, and you see a sort of Erin O'Toole, or like a Tobias Elwood or Alexander Johnson, as I know that you like to refer to him as, Alexander Johnson or something, then and they don't enact any sort of and not just conservative policies, but just enacting leftist policies, then of course they're going to move, or they're going to realign in some different political order, or structure, or political party. Though, I mean, one of the problems I think in the UK is obviously we don't have that Maxime Bernier figure in politics who can that can sort of fill that gap. I see a lot of people who did vote Conservative in 2019 coming to the point of, well, we're just not going to go out and vote. That seems to be the driving force at the moment that I see within opinion polling, and also for me when I go out do sort of canvassing around my local area. There's I mean, my local area is not representative of the country at large, but even still, there are people saying, "Well, we're just not going to vote next time at all. We're not going to vote for it because we don't like." They're not going to vote Keir Starmer because why would you? But they're just not going to vote.
Look, first of all, with Alexander Johnson, he likes to be called Alexander Johnson. Like, he and his family all refer to him as Alexander Johnson. Boris is a made-up political name.
Yes. Yeah.
Nobody who knows him calls him Boris, except to the press or the mainstream media. So that's why I won't call.
That's why you call it. Yeah, call him. Yeah,
I'm not sure. I think that he is actually a progressive conservative, although his moronic watermelon green net zero stuff is certainly in that direction.
I don't know if he is. I know that he's been enacting effectively progressive policies. Whether he's progressive himself, I don't know. I mean, the thing that was with him, I just think that he's incredibly politically illiterate,
and an opportunist,
indeed. And I think for him, okay, so this might be popular opinion for some, but let's just say in the hypothetical world, Boris Johnson came to power where you had institutions and NGOs and people who surrounded him. Instead of them being left wing, they were ultra right wing nationalists.
I think get along with them fine.
Yeah, and then the thing was, but then Boris would be an ultra right wing nationalist. If he was surrounded by progressives, he would be, as he is now. He's being a progressive. If he was surrounded by classical liberals, he'd probably be more classical liberal type. So the people, it's quite clear that he's just a product of his surrounding, and also he's a product of the legacy of Blair. And this is the thing that I have a real problem with, all the conservatives, and why because I was asked okay, well, I was asked who do you think will be taking over from Boris when he leaves? And it's well, it doesn't really matter because none of them there's no one that can take over from him. There's no one that's going to lead the party that I think would do any better because they all exist through the paradigm of Blairism, and that's the problem.
Look, I don't want to go on about this because it's going to take you off your stream topic, but
yeah.
I am a supporter of what Peter Hitchens came out with quite recently. He's pointing out that the people who want to get rid of Johnson are not friends to Brexit. They're not friends to Britain.
No,
they are mainly MSM entities like the Bias Brainwashing Corporation, etc.
Yes.
And so, although I'm totally agree with Peter Hitchens on this as well, Peter Hitchens said he certainly doesn't support Johnson, but on the other hand, he thinks getting rid of him at the moment would probably be more damage than not. And I tend to go along with that. But like I said, I don't want to really go into that, certainly this early in your stream, because it will derail it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so I mean, so my response to that, guys, is I don't want Boris. I don't want him on a practical level, given what's happening recently with COVID restrictions and everything, and the direction it's going in this country. I don't want him to resign now, because if he was to go and they put like Savid or someone like that in, it would undoubtedly be 1,000 times worse. It would be a bigger L, if that makes sense. I mean,
look, if he put Rishi Sunak or Priti Patel or Sajid Javid, any of those people became prime minister, I would put money that the Conservatives would lose the next election.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that
because certainly all those so-called red wall seats that the Conservatives took, virtually all of those would revert to Labour if that happened.
Yeah, and a lot of seats in the south and the southeast would as well.
Look, I'm not a Conservative supporter. Don't get me wrong. I think that insofar as people on the right support the Conservative Party now, it should be individual MPs, and I think there's only about 50 of them at most who are actually Conservative based on their voting record. And I think, fine, we should support those people. But other than that, I think people on the right have got to look at the smaller right of centre parties and support them, and also urge those smaller right of centre parties to have at least some kind of loose electoral alliance so they don't run against each other in the same seats. But I've been saying this like a broken record for like 2 years now.
No, that's that is true. And I mean, my local MP, he is. I mean, he's quite hard to pin down. He's voted. I mean, I give him credit because like on things like the on like just bread and butter Conservative issues like tax, like same-sex marriage, like the EU and everything. He's voted all in the the Conservative positions on all of those, and he's been quite unapologetic because of that. And so I can't fault him. And so I mean, and then UKIP and the Brexit, UKIP did a sort of an electoral pact sort of thing, so or they had like a discussion, and so the Brexit Party as well on before the national stuff was involved, where they agreed to stand down. So I mean, definitely local MPs and in councillors and whoever.
I think it's the blanket support of the Conservative Party by the right that's got to go. It's just because someone has Conservative in front of their name and a blue rosette, you need to actually look at who this person is, because there are a lot of Conservative MPs now, not just prime ministers, because that's what your subject to your stream is mainly, and cabinet ministers, obviously. But there are a lot of ordinary backbench Conservative MPs today who are in no way, shape, or form actually Conservative.
No. I mean, absolutely not. The one Conservative who I really hate with a burning passion is Johnny Mercer, and people know why. And it was the way that he was involved with bringing Roger Scruton down, and I with him, I've met Johnny Mercer, and He wanted to shake my hand. I just walked past him at a party function. I was like, no.
Don't blame me. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I don't know anyone who didn't like Roger Scruton. So, the idea of bringing him down to me was always evil.
It was, because it was based on a lie, and they knew it, and it was and they sort of sided with the Guardian and everything. Anyway, I'll get back on to point of stream. So the point of stream, guys, is I've been reading not forbidden text this time, but just very boring and inconsequential. It was David Cameron's biography, and I will just I'll give you guys the title of it, so you can, if you feel inclined and you're bored and or you have a life, if you don't have a life like myself, you can pick up this book. It's David Cameron, and it's called. I think it's titled "For the Record." Okay. and there are several paragraphs in that where he talks about progressive conservatism, what it is, how the plan was implemented, and how it means in practice. Um, and that the progressive conservatism, as Iron Duke sort of mentioned at the start from here, it's obviously an oxymoron because you can't be a progressive and be a conservative. Um, but Cameron manages to work a way around it, and you find out in his book how he actually explicitly says it, and also Osborne, because Osborne is like a side character in this book who appears many times and sort of also sort of reaffirms that position, and it it I wouldn't say it's eye opening, but it explains a lot of events, because the thing is I was a teenager when all of this was happening, so I wasn't really mentally equipped to understand what was happening in detail. And I mean, as a teenager, I was a bit of like a midwit. I'm not going to lie. I just in my view, I just felt Labour left wing, Tories right wing, and stuff like that. And I was even relatively in favour of the EU until 2014, when I had a bit of a red pill on the EU. So yeah, I mean, that's where we're going to start. So I mean, I'm Duke. Any questions? I'm going to start before.
I think one of the things you've got to recognise is that the fact that Cameron was so easily able to go into a coalition with the Lib Dems shows that he's not a conservative, because the Lib Dems are not a centre party; they're a centre-left party.
Yes, they are explicitly centre left, and it's interesting because he does actually talk about this in the book, where he I mean, really, he publicly at the time it was seen as like, oh, there was a great, all these great sort of discussions between the Lib Dem leadership and Conservative leadership, thrashing out compromises and agreements. It was like, not really. They just sat down, had a dinner party, and basically agreed everything on the first night.
Yeah.
There wasn't really much. Ryan Wolf Fez in the chat correcting me, but there was nothing.
A good point. A good point.
Yes.
These days.
Yes, indeed. But there was nothing. There was nothing that they opposed on. But one of the things is, and this, I might be putting my conspiracy sort of hat on, but Cameron, I think, planned. The progressive conservative stuff was obviously planned right before his leadership election, and I mean, obviously they were this group of conservatives that he that existed around him was of course known as the Notting Hill set, and this included people like Gove, people like Osborne, I think Jeremy Hunt, all these sort of people, and they were effectively, and this is explicit in the book here, they're effectively the heirs of Blair, and Cameron does refer to himself as the heir of Blair, and the way that he rationalizes, and this was sort of summing up the book here, but the way that he rationalizes progressive conservatism is that he's conserving the legacy that Blair put out, the vision of Blair's Britain. He's preserving that, and he's saying that's what the Conservative Party is about. It's about preserving that thing, that thing that Blair created.
So, according to Cameron, the thing that the Conservative Party need to conserve is the Britain created by an ex-Trotskyist who was then leading New Labour.
Yes, and that is laughable. It really, I would say, people, if you go to chapter, I'll just bring up the chapter so you can, if you've got audiobook, you can also find it on Audible, because I have it on Audible as well, because I just want to listen to Cameron talk about it, like from his, because it's Audible with Cameron reading, reading it and everything. I think it's chapter 17, and it's progressive conservatism in practice. The other one to watch is what was the other one? It was Eton, Oxford, and the Soviet Union, and
that'd be interesting.
That's that's a very interesting one.
Quite a lot of
And
traitors in that little triangle.
yes, well, you see it. Now this is the thing, because I wanted to find in this book, because Starkey said that he thought it might be in the book, in an interview he did, which I'll interview I found of him, and I thought it was in the book, and I'm trying to find it. Maybe I missed it while reading, or when I was listening to the audiobook, I just sort of blanked out. But apparently, Cameron openly admits at some point that he, bearing in mind he went to Oxford and he studied political. I think it was it political history or something along those lines, and he didn't know, one, what the Magna Carta was, and two, the contents of the Magna Carta and what it all meant. And
I've seen Starkey make that claim, and I'm sure he's correct.
I am sure he's correct as well, because, and the reason I know that he's correct is in the chapter of progressive conservatism. One of the things that Cameron points out is he says, Britain doesn't have a Bill of Rights, and I wanted to create something close to that. You goddamn special need. Sorry, I can't say that. Because on Twitter I get words. I can't say the words, but holy hell! How the hell do you go through Oxford, study history, and not know about 1688 at least? Holy pissing hell!
Yeah. Because it didn't interest him. That's why. It's one of I've watched people like particularly anything historical. If it's not something that your brain is like kind of wired to take in, people just pass across it.
Yeah.
I don't think David Cameron had any sense of history, and certainly not British history whatsoever. None.
No. I mean, as much as I criticize Boris,
he's a not terrible historian, certainly on things like the ancient Greeks.
He wouldn't make that rookie mistake. I mean, to be fair, I think Boris is more of an expert in Greek history, from what I understand, in Greek mythology.
Yeah, ancient Greece for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
classical Greece, I suppose one would say.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do a debate with him, like on a sort of.
No, I would not. I would not either, and I actually like ancient history.
No, because I think
Boris has some. Boris has some historical stuff in him. Yeah. Like I think he sometimes sees himself as a vaguely Churchillian figure, which on the one hand I don't think is something you should aim to be as a conservative politician, and on the other is nonsense in his case. But it's. I think the Right Honourable Fez in the chat is saying political history starts with the French Revolution, doesn't it? Well, maybe you're right. I don't know. Something political. I know quite a lot about political history, but it's not a subject I've ever studied formally. So,
political history starts with the French Revolution,
according to the Right Honourable Fez. Yes.
Oh, I mean, I don't know what I was just paraphrasing what course he was studying. I can't remember what course he studied. I mean, it could have been British history or something like that. But regardless,
I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, regardless, from a lot of politicians, I think they do think that political history does start with the French Revolution, because obviously the concept of nationhood in its modern conception, of course, the left wing, right wing being the sort of invention that happened in post-revolutionary France. I mean,
I think that's overdone in Britain's case anyway, because I think you can make a fairly strong argument that Alfred the Great's Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex was a nation in most respects. And I also think that you can make a strong argument that by even the early 1400s, when feudalism was long dead in Britain, largely because of the Black Death, but also because of the fact it was always alien to Britain. It only came here with William the Bastard in 1066, so it never went very deep. And the Black Death in the 1300s completely wiped it out. So that by the time of the Hundred Years' War, and you've got Henry V's Agincourt campaign, the English army that went across to France with Henry V was a professional English national army.
Yeah, I mean,
much more so than the feudal French hosts that they were still using
yes.
at that time.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I had a heated debate with. I think it was someone on. I think it was like who I think it was an economic erudite or someone. It might not be him. Might be someone like that. But my argument was basically the Normans never actually conquered the Saxons. The Saxons just conquered the Normans when they got stuck on England.
Yeah, they eventually got absorbed.
Yeah, I mean, because there was actually, I think it was in the Doomsday Book. I think it was, what was it? It was, it says 40,000 Normans, but obviously that's not correct because it was 40,000 being a mixture of Normans, Dutch, French, what were they called in southern France? Octans?
Yeah, something like that. And also it would have included like women and children as well, no doubt.
Yeah, and I mean, like I think the Bishop of Exeter, who was in 1067, he was also like a bishop in France, as a bishopry in France, and so a lot of them were French. They weren't just Normans; they were all over sort of the kingdom and such. And oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, first thank you. Yeah, I can't pronounce it. They were fundamentally absorbed. The structures that the Normans had created was just absorbed into into sort of the Anglo-Saxon culture. And I mean, the one Norman king who poor King Stephen, who is considered one of the most unsuccessful kings of England. He really actively relied and seek the support of Anglo-Saxon nobility, even towards even though his reign was largely unsuccessful. But
I mean, even by the time of Richard the Lionheart, the army the English army that Richard the Lionheart took to the Holy Land on the Third Crusade, although most of his knights, although not all of them, were Norman descent or French descent, he did have some Anglo-Saxon knights with him as well. But the vast majority of his ordinary soldiers were English, which is why the first time that the English are using the battle cry St. George in battle was Richard the Lionheart's English soldiers in the Holy Land during the Third Crusade.
Oh, that's right, because of course, being the patron saint of arms, taking arms and such, and the in military and combat. Yeah, I mean, it definitely made sense. And
I mean, I should say to people, look, I'm an unapologetic English and British exceptionalist, and I don't think that many of the ways that nations, etc., can be analysed on the continent of Europe, they don't all apply in the same way to Britain, because our history and system and the fact that we're isolated by that wonderful body of water has made us different.
Yeah, one thing because I had I think one of my earliest streams, I had a debate with like a reactionary on this issue, because she was she didn't really believe in sort of the concept of English exceptionalism, and I was and so I just the way that I explained it from why I think it is the case, like as you pointed out, was if you look at the fall of the Western Roman Empire and look at because she understood she knew that the history of the Dark Ages in places like Gaul and Hispania and Italy and such, and I said, just if you look at how it transpired and what happened in that Dark Age period, you had Gothic tribes, ruling over, administrating over what's now modern Spain. You had the Ostrogoths that subsequently conquered Odoacer's nation in kingdom in Italy. And then again, you had the Gauls in you had the Franks in Gaul, and then like the I think it's Alemanni and the Burgundians and everything. And what when they took over, because we know from sort of archaeological things that these Germanic peoples were a minority, of like freemen, of, I guess you say, like nobility, and they would just sort of like congregate in centres where, you know, parochs all existed, and you had an existing Catholic Church as well that sort of held structures together. And that's why, and so when, like, I mean, like with the Visigoths, they were already there when the Roman Empire was still, or the Western Roman Empire was still politically a thing, and so they just administrated and were absorbed by the Roman system, and then the same with the Franks as well, because the Catholic Church and everything and the population were still sort of, while politically the Roman Empire didn't exist, but on the even on the local level, on the structural level, the structures of the empire existed, meaning that things like the Frankish realm and such were able to exist and continue. And that's why within very short periods of, you had conversions of like the Franks to Catholicism, and then you had like Arian Christianity was sort of on the back foot, and the Visigoths converted to the Catholic stuff and everything. But with Britain though, or with Roman Britain, you had a period which is obviously unknown. We don't know what happened definitively. We can sort of guess what's happened, but we know that Anglo-Saxon and Northern Germanic tribes began arriving on the shores of modern England, speculating to be some of it might have been start at the early start mercenary work, because the Roman British wanted mercenaries to protect they wanted protection from raiders and everything. That's one theory. But what we know is they started arriving in larger numbers and settling, and those structures didn't exist in Britain, or they didn't survive in Britain for whatever reason.
Well, we have in Britain, we're lucky enough that we have the Venerable Bede, for example. So there's actually more what used to be called Dark Age history from Britain than there is from a lot of other places in Europe.
Yes. I mean, well, most stuff that we know about from Rome today, that's even still taught in schools today and in universities, is from the Venerable Bede and everything. But the thing there was, if you look at it, what made us different was the Anglo-Saxons didn't just naturally, if there was a church existing in Britain, which we know that there it was because of works, by St. Patrick, by various other sort of Romano-Celtic saints. So we know there was structures in place, but for whatever reason, it wasn't as robust as that on the continent. Maybe because of geographical reasons, maybe just because of numbers or whatever, or wars or conflicts. But
Britain was a late conquest for the Romans relative to Gaul,
yes.
For example.
Yes, I mean there is. I think there's a book I was reading, was it Mark Morris or something, and he sort of states in there, he's quite good actually, because the history of Anglo-Saxon Britain, but he sort of states that effectively when the Romans left, the Celts, the Romano Brits, portion of society just reverted back to their sort of native beliefs, but slightly Romanized.
Quite possibly, yes, quite possibly.
Yeah.
Listen, do you know what? I would love to do a history stream with you.
Yeah, I really should get back to it.
Yeah, I'm terrible for this. I do it on my streams all the time because
I know I'm the world's worst. Everyone, people who watch me will know.
So to maybe bring us back on track a bit, I would just ask you this question, which I think is central to your main stream subject. Don't you think that the Conservatives were going to replace Labour around the time they did anyway, just because by that time British voters were fed up with New Labour? Because they've been in power so long, and their endless wars have been going on so long.
Yeah, so you are right, because what you had was in 2005, Tony Blair won a third term as Prime Minister, but with a significantly reduced majority, and the Conservative leader at the time was Michael Howard. And
who I didn't hate, by the way.
No, I don't remember Michael Howard because I wasn't really that politically aware then, anyway. But I, looking back, I mean, there's nothing. I wouldn't say that he was like a.
He
I
was
wouldn't
to the
say he
right.
was.
He was to the right of John Major, for example, who stabbed
Yeah.
Mrs. Thatcher in the back in the
Oh, he was a
1980s.
Thatcherite. I would say that he was a Thatcherite.
Yeah,
Definitely.
closer to. Yeah, closer to.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, and one of my favorite conservatives, as someone who I have met, and I really like him. I think he's probably one of the better conservatives that's still alive today. Is Norman Tebbit.
Yep. Yeah, I was always a big Norman Tebbit fan for sure.
Yeah, Norman Tebbit, and I heard what he said privately about Heseltine. It's really funny.
That's so
and-
true too. So true too.
my God, yeah, it's so much base stuff. He said what he wanted to do to Heseltine. Anyway, that's another. I can't talk about that. So in 2005, obviously the Conservatives lost, but they significantly gained seats. I think about 90 odd seats they gained.
Yeah, so they were on the verge of regaining power anyway. They did not need to go significantly to the left, which is what Cameron did.
But this is what Cameron did in his book, and he adopted, and I think Academic Agent talked about it on his channel, the sort of Blairite tactic of basically saying, Blair does this thing, right, where if he wants something pushed, he phrases it in a way that it's an inevitable thing that has to happen, because it's the unstoppable march of progress. It's inevitability of it all, and Cameron did that.
Bullshit, which is what he does all the time, and he still does today.
Yeah, he still does today. So, like biometric green passes, microchips in your arms to stop COVID. It's inevitable. You have to accept it. It's inevitable. It's an inevitable way of how we can live our lives in the future. It's like, fuck off, you absolute nasty little fucking venomous little shit.
Yeah, take your sons and daughters to the vets to get a little microchip as if they were a puppy or a kitten.
Yes, exactly. But you see, this is what Cameron did, because Cameron, the Notting Hill set quickly after 2005, they quickly started ramping up the pressure, because of course Michael Howard at that point went, and you had the leadership in 2000, I think it was 2006 or 2007, or the build up to it was in 2005, at the end of 2005 anyway. And you had, when it came to candidates, there was the two candidates at the end was Cameron and David Davis, and David Davis, I think, one of the problems that he had was he didn't have, and this is maybe me sort of like reading too much about sort of like elite structures and all that, but Cameron did have, like, he had journalists, he had he had money men on his side, he had allegedly he met with Murdoch and everything, and met even with Tony Blair and such, but he had important figures that you need, and of course David Davis had none of that. His campaign really was not. It was very much appealing to the grassroots, which I respect.
Can I ask you, Alsha, because you may know this, because I don't. I know David Davis was excellent on Brexit, but I understand he was not. He was in favour of continued mass immigration. Is that right?
Yeah. This is the thing, right?
Because to me, that's an immediate wipeout for someone who claims to be a conservative these days.
Yeah. Yes, he has expressed favorability of extent, and I think he did this as well during Brexit, where it was the argument was we love immigration and we're going to continue it. We're just going to increase the opportunities outside the immigration outside the EU.
So rather than getting Poles, and listen, I'm not in favour of Britain being overrun by Poles at all. Don't get me wrong, but given the choice between Poles and Somalis and Pakistanis, I know who I'd sooner have, and it wouldn't be the latter two.
Well, yeah, obviously, yeah. This is the thing. Like, if it was like German, okay, let's just say it was German immigration, like mass German immigration.
Well,
I
it
would
depends who
think.
you call German these days, of course. But yeah.
um, the famous sand people of Germany.
Yes.
Yeah,
Angela Merkel's children.
yeah. Let's say traditional Germans. Even then, I know that some people on the right would say, well, actually, that's not so much a problem. I would still say, because they're, and this is the thing that Enoch Powell was sort of saying back in the day, was one of the problems with mass immigration or immigration of any sort where you have high numbers is that they can't assimilate. And I know, like the left, they love to, when you talk about historical precedents of mass immigration, it's always like what is it? It's they don't usually, they used to do the Romans, but they won't do that now because I think it's a bit too difficult for them to sort of argue. But they always like to talk about the Normans, which we briefly referenced earlier, and also the French Huguenots as well.
The Huguenots, yeah. The
Yeah.
Huguenot, all of the Huguenot immigration that came across the UK over about, I think it was about 30, 35 years, was not as much as the 700,000 a year at the moment that Alexander Johnson is allowing into Britain.
No, well, I mean, I remember there was one leftist who was going, oh, but a million left France and came to Britain. And I was like,
No.
Are you sure about that, love? Because one of the things that they'd like to forget is, of course, Britain at that time had a very large, I guess you could say, holdings in North America, and a lot of French Huguenots made the decision to, if they they would go to British territories in North America because
and also large numbers of French Huguenots went to South Africa. They went to the Dutch East India Company Cape Colony, and I know that because I lived in South Africa for 15 years. So French Huguenots are a integral part of the makeup of the Afrikaner people.
Yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of wealthy French, the French Huguenots, did stay within London because there's I can't remember where it is in London. I want to say Chelsea, but there is like a couple of roads there where it's like French names. So
they also, like the less wealthy ones, a lot of them were people like weavers and stuff, and they used to be, before London was destroyed by Blair and all the rest of them. There used to be these. Still some of these old 17th and 18th century houses with very large windows for the day. And that was because they were inhabited by weavers who needed a lot of light to see what they were doing.
Yeah.
But again, we're getting historical.
We're getting historical, yeah. So anyway, the point was, Cameron, he did sort of that Blair tactic about sort of declaring this to the party, a inevitability that, and in his framing, and this was his pitch to the country in the leadership, I think it was 2006, 2007, was the old right is what holding us back. The reason we lost 2000, because the reason we lost 2005 general election, it was the right of the party was holding us back. People, and he explicitly says in the book, the public don't like us. The nasty party, the bigoted against homosexuals and blacks and all these sort of things, and the racist party.
Hang on, you've just come up with one of the magic things which points out that there is no way that Cameron was any sort of conservative because he brought in homosexual marriage.
Exactly, and he does
hardly a conservative policy.
And I was involved. Now, one of the first times I interacted with my local conservative branch, which was in Devon at the time, was when this happened. And I'll tell you after I finish this bit about thing, I'll tell people what happened because I remember it very vividly. I remember what happened internally in the party and stuff that was covered up by the media at the time because it wasn't being reported. But there was, there was a mass exodus from the party.
I could, particularly in a traditional area like Devon, I could well believe that. Yes,
but it was all over the country because the reason it was found out was they found out that donations, in like party donations and membership, well, they did party returns, like different donations and membership returns, and you could, even though you can't see the membership numbers because the Conservative Party likes to suppress it, you could see the sort of returns, and their returns drastically dropped, and it was because there was a mass exodus from the party, and this also coincided when UKIP, because this was 2013 sort of time zone going into 2014, and that's because the reason why UKIP, in my belief, it did so well was because you had like Conservative councillors doing like switches overnight to UKIP. I remember Conservative Conservatives that we knew, like in our family and such, who just joined UKIP, and it was like,
yeah.
Cool. And we joined UKIP. I
I'd just say right on Fez in the chat is again right, because he said that was what I was trying to remember. He said a lot of the Huguenots sold in Spitalfields, a bit east of the city of London. Yes, Spitalfields is kind of the East End. It's that sort of area where Jack the Ripper operated in the 1880s and that kind of stuff. But yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. But what I would say is this: that this mass exodus to UKIP, of course, was why Cameron then was forced into holding the referendum.
Yeah. Well, that's how it was.
So you could say that perhaps this move to the left by Cameron, and in particular the legalizing homosexual marriage, probably had a direct effect on his them being forced, because of the pressure from UKIP, to hold a referendum, because he certainly didn't want to, and he certainly thought he was going to win it.
What's frustrating about that, though, is in his book, he basically, in many points in his book, he just admits that he just tells his party membership, the Conservatives, to go fuck themselves. He literally just don't care. You're right-wing Conservative Christian members of the party. No, go.
So actual Conservatives, in other words.
Yeah. And Osborne, the absolute disgusting little weasel. And by the way, he said something about Colston's statue recently, which I'm not going to talk about because I'll just Fed post. But he's a very, very disgusting, slimy little scumbag who I have no sort of time of even mentioning his name, to be honest.
Is he still an MP?
He isn't, thankfully. He's now a media mogul.
What a surprise!
This is the thing. After resigning as Chancellor and I think he was still MP when this was happening, though. But after sort of quitting the job as Chancellor, he became what was it? He became the sort of chief editor of the Evening Standard. Wow. And he had no newspaper experience, so that was like okay. That was when Mrs. May took over, and then he resigned his seat in 2017. But
I think perhaps we'll get on to Mrs. May in due course. But,
definitely.
But yeah, I just think that that you can. You can't necessarily see it if you look at. You certainly can't see it if you look at the mainstream media version of events, because it's just nonsense these days, and it has been for quite a long time now. If you look at what happened with the Conservative Party, with the lurch to the left under Cameron, and as I say, in particular, the legalizing of homosexual marriage, which kind of was two things, I think. I mean, look, I don't care if someone's gay if they keep it to themselves, and what they do in private doesn't worry me really. All right, I'm not a complete bigot in that respect. I like if someone like David Starkey is gay and doesn't go on about it, and it's not the main thing about him, that's fine. I don't care. But there's no need for them to be able to get married legally. And if you do allow them to get married legally, it's a direct body blow against the institution of marriage, and it's also a push to the left in all sorts of other ways. Because why do you get married? I mean, I was a married man. I've got a grown-up son. You get married to have kids, and that is something homosexual people cannot do.
No. And there was actually one thing that was really bad I remember at the time, and again, this was coincide with the when they had the same-sex marriage bill, it was debated in Parliament, and you had, and this was, I think, this was the sort of time, because 2015 was very unique because a lot of the Conservative MPs and people who I say were Conservative MPs. I mean, there are a very small minority in the Conservative Party who are genuinely right wing, but even those who are generally right wing are kind of hesitant. They're reluctant to be public about their views.
Which is ridiculous, because
which is,
I think most average people in the UK, and I don't care whether they are traditional Conservative voters or traditional Labour voters, most of the ordinary average public were not really in favour of legalising homosexual marriage.
No.
And it certainly wouldn't have been an issue that they would have put to the fore.
Well, I mean, the problem I had with Ipsos Mori polls, which was a lot of it was, and YouGov polls, is that they predominantly poll people in urban cities. So it's like, well, of course.
Yeah, it's very easy to rig polls because of where you do them, even what time of day you do them, whether they're telephone polls or face to face, how you phrase the question. It is very easy to rig polls. I don't believe any of them very much.
I mean, have you ever been contacted by a pollster before?
Never once.
No, neither have I. So I don't believe any. All polls are lies, and and so going back to Cameron. So what you had was the framing was the old right of the party is what's holding us back. This is when you're talking to the membership, and he says, and they their values is out of step. Britain is this cool Britannia image of Britain. That is the future that has been forged. That is the future that we now exist within. That's what we have to accept. And for whatever reason, maybe because because it was a different world then, the Conservative Party membership were taken in by Cameron. I mean,
do they have any? But do they really have any power, Al Shire? I mean, I am no expert on the Conservative Party. I voted for Maggie Thatcher a couple of times. She's the only politician I've ever voted for. And no, I don't think she was perfect, but she was a damn sight better than the opposition in those days. And she had the balls to fight the Falklands War. From what I see of the Conservative Party, and I know a lot of people who have been or even still are members of the Conservative Party, and from everything they tell me, entryism into the Conservative Party is almost impossible. It is very tightly controlled from Conservative central office.
Yeah.
And if you have even slightly wrong opinions, your chances of getting on the list of MPs is very low. Wrong opinions in the sense of whoever is running the show at this time. And I just think I don't think that the ordinary members of the Conservative Party are there for any other reason than to pay money, really.
It's interesting what you say that, because I know this is not
maybe not on a local level. Let me just
yeah.
I think there are
that's what I was referring to when I said the membership. I should have been clear.
I think there are councillors and all this kind of stuff that are probably absolutely fine, but in terms of the parliamentary party, and the ordinary members' influence on the parliamentary party, I think it's like very minimal, minimal.
So I mean, under Cameron, you did have I think there was this. If I remember, I think it was either under Major or maybe it was slightly later, but the concept of central office, Conservative Party central office, was a relatively new. It was relatively new. It was modelled after Labour structures, Labour Party structures, but it used to be very decentralised into the local associations, and quite frankly, it was perfect then, because people actually got they actually did have control over who was their MP, and you had most MPs who were genuine Conservatives, and you generally represented their views. but yeah, I mean, when central office came in, you have like this two-tier structure where you have professional neolibs. I don't even call them neocons because I don't think they're even neocons in that sense. They're just neolibs who occupy. They come straight out of Oxbridge and go straight into parliamentary researcher roles or council and become councillors,
and then they get parachuted into a constituency somewhere or other.
Yeah, I've seen that. I mean, as a local party member, I've seen that happen countless times, and you can actually tell because if you look at, I mean, there's like I follow I follow a couple of the up and coming Oxbridge chaps who have like the party puts extraordinary time and effort behind, let's say, and you can tell they're going to be future MPs in safe seats, and I mean, on every issue they're absolutely as wet and normie as they come. I mean, they're literally like basic bitch. And what I did was I have a habit because I got like a black book list of like of people who there's three things I judge people on the right and in the Conservative Party as well, which is probably not a good metric because you sort of disregard most of them, but how they responded to COVID and lockdowns, how they responded to Black Lives Matter, and how they responded to Trump during the end of his presidency.
Yeah, and the statues and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Brexit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Brexit. Yeah, Brexit. But I mean, like the BLM stuff, including statues, as you pointed out, that's very important because if what I'm looking for is like I look within the party to see if are there any Conservatives who can actually see past the bullshit in the media, or are they just because this comes back to the sort of the sort of the basic sort of two, it's like juvenile sort of classes of the rulers and the ruled. Like, are these people rulers, or are they just going to be ruled? And from what I can see, like the counts, like the parachutey ones, they're on like statues and BLM stuff. They just go saying, "Oh well, we need to understand Black people's pain and suffering." It's like, oh, fuck off, And
yeah, pain and suffering. Yeah, right.
It's like pain and suffering. Yes, there's pain and suffering. I said the only pain
look, you know, I'm sure you know John Cavalier, who was.
Oh yeah. We're on the Wellington Project together.
Good,
yes.
Good. Yeah, I'm also a member of that. I haven't contributed anything yet, but I will at some stage. But John Cavalier was doing a good stream series. I don't know if he's still doing it, but he was doing a good series, and I went on a couple of his streams about Enoch Powell. And to me, when the Conservatives abandoned Powell in the late 60s, who was wildly popular with like people who would never have voted Conservative in any other way, shape, or form. Like my father, who did vote Conservative, by the way, although he was a working class in a London bloke who was a former British soldier, he voted Conservative, but he was a huge Enoch Powell fan in the late 60s. Like I was born in 1965, so I barely remember this stuff at all. But I do. My father certainly often spoke about how much he admired Enoch Powell, and I think when they replaced Powell with that nonce Heath, and sorry, can't call him anything else. He was. And also absolutely pro EU and like every other nasty thing you could think of. When that happened, I think that was when the Conservative Party decisively changed into its modern form.
It's also important to remember that during that time period, you also had the who was, I think it was I guess it's been coined as the March through the institutions. That's when you had like the first institutional power grab from the left.
That was when they were starting to come out into the open by the late 1960s. Yes.
Yeah, late 1960s and into the 70s and everything, and not just in media but also in education and everything else. And yes. I always think that Thatcher. She was a very cunning individual. I think she saw it. I mean, one of the biggest faults one of the biggest things that I think could be a good criticism against her is that she was too focused on the unions and not focused enough on the media, on the education, the education.
Yeah, and also not focused enough on retaining some much more efficient British industry rather than just getting rid of it.
Yeah, she fell into the what was it, like the Reaganomics,
Yeah.
stuff, and I mean, I'd like to know if she actually changed her views on that towards
Well, I mean, the other thing she got wrong was that she only realised what the EU was really about very late in the day.
Yeah, she did,
And,
because
and by the time she did realise it, John Major was waiting in the wings to stab her in the back, a la
yeah.
Julius Caesar. So, you know.
Yeah, that's the tragedy of Mrs. Thatcher. It's because her political career, if you were to write it in the book, would be a tragedy, because it sort of ends in betrayal, and like that sort of like the realization of what it was all about, and it's
But it also slightly brings us back to your main point in that she had 3 terms. Like, all right, the second one, the third one ended up being that idiot
shorter
major.
than expected.
Well, it ended up being that idiot major who was a globalist totally.
Oh yeah.
So, and by the way, when I say globalist, I'm not speaking of any particular race or religious group. I just mean globalists.
We all know. We don't. People on my channel, they know what you mean by globalist.
Yeah, it was pointed out to me recently that some people use that term meaning a specific group, whereas I don't. I'm sure that group includes some of that specific group, but not all of them by any means.
Yeah.
But anyway, all I'm saying is that I think like 3 terms is what British governments get if they're lucky. If they're lucky and reasonably successful, they get 3 terms, and this is why, as I say, I don't think that Cameron needed to go to the left. I think the Conservatives would have won that election anyway if they'd have had reasonably sensible policies.
Yeah, I think because one of the things that Cameron and I think Cameron was always on the left. I think he.
Yeah. Sure.
One thing that I get from Cameron and his biography, and people like who know him, he was enamored by Blair's managerialistic style of politics. Like, he really got off on it. He really loved it, and it was something that he wanted, because the Conservative Party at that point was, it wasn't. I wouldn't say that it was. It still held, right, up until that point when he became leader. There was still elements in the Conservative Party which was the old party, let's say. That's still the old embers of what came before it all was still there, and it wasn't so much of a threat, but there were people in the party who were obviously wouldn't agree with him on the on sort of like radical changes like this.
Sure.
So that's why. I mean, of course, that part of the party just doesn't exist now. It went in 2015, and we'll get on to why that happened. And a lot of those MPs went. Yeah, when he came in, it was in the leadership stuff. He basically sold, and I will say this, because I said, well, how did the party fall for it? He did. I mean, he did one thing that a lot of leftists do, like Blair. He hid his power levels. He didn't reveal his true intentions. He did come across. I mean, for him, a lot of it was on the economy, and it was. I mean, at this time, you had. The labor spending and everything, and the debt, the national debt and everything, and this was just before the crash, but it was something which was very pressing anyway. So that's why a lot of the party were quite interested in him. He was also young. Well, there was a big emphasis on the media of his sort of youthfulness. And
because we all know young people don't make mistakes, of course.
Oh, of course. None of the young person makes a mistake. And compared to David Davis, of course, who had been there for quite some time in Parliament. And you had his the sort of, again, when I say Notting Hill stuff, his redefining of conservatism to be more like young, hip, and trendy, and so he'd like go down to youth centres in council estates, and he did now William Hague did try to do this, but he went to like was it Butland? No, not Butlands. Went to Thorpe Park, and he ended up like having like embarrassing media mugshots of him getting splashed by water or something like that, and on a ride, and it was a complete disaster. But I mean, Cameron avoided that. But one thing that Cameron did have, unlike the previous, Hague and such, was that they had the backing of the Murdoch press, and that and which backed, of course, Tony Blair, and I, looking into it, because people were wondering, well, why didn't, because they didn't back him, the Murdoch press didn't back him in 2005 general election, I believe. I think that was when it sort of, the support largely went at that point. And apparently Mr. Blair had a thing with Murdoch's wife at the time.
Really?
Yes. There was that Asian lady who then went on to have a thing with Putin after she got a divorce from.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me in the least tiny bit, to be honest with you.
Someone now, Right Honourable Nimble just pointed out something.
Yeah.
He did blame the Monday Club for the downfall of '97, which he does talk about that in the book. And this thing he says, the old right was what caused it. No,
the Monday Club to me was the one bit of the Conservative Party which was somehow a tenuous link back to when it was really a Conservative Party in like the turn of the 19th, 20th century. It was the one bit that kept it true.
I can tell you for a fact, right? In Devon in '97, because a lot of seats in Devon went to the Liberal Democrats. I think Cornwall went all to the Liberal Democrats with like a couple of Labour seats, but there were some parts of Devon that did retain Conservatives, and some parts of Somerset as well. What the seat that I'm in as well did in '97 remain, and that was because the Monday Club used to be a very, 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 very key factional group within rural constituencies like that, especially amongst what would, because I mean a lot of those people would
Al Shatori, you've got a question in the chat from current commentator. He doesn't know what the Monday Club is. Maybe you could.
Okay, so the Monday Club. So the Monday Club, they were I guess a faction within the Conservative.
A group of right-wing Conservative MPs and supporters, I think, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, they're a group. They were a group, and they, I mean, they were. I would say they were quite influential back in the day. They definitely had influence in the past.
I mean, Jonathan Bowden at one stage was a member of the Monday Club.
Yes, of course, he was a member. Was he a councillor, Jonathan Bowden?
I'm not sure, mate, but he was certainly a member of the Monday Club. That's a fact. He was, and that was like probably that would have been in the 80s or 90s, I guess. And as Eddie Butler was explaining, it was right at the tail end of when the Monday Club was basically destroyed by Cameron, etc.
Yes, indeed. Actually, current commentator, maybe not directly, but he just. The reason why Cameron wanted, and as you mentioned, to destroy them was they were actually like a proper Spartan vanguard group, which were, I guess you say, uncorruptible from progressivism. Because they were ideologically and socially equipped to respond to it.
They were real conservatives who would have been at home even back when Lord Salisbury was Prime Minister, for example. The last real Conservative Prime Minister, in my opinion.
Yeah, my grandfather, who was a constituency chairman for Stone, and he was a member of the Monday Club.
Yeah.
Um,
They
there's-
were about what the Conservative Party should be about, in my opinion, anyway.
yeah, I mean, quite. I mean, my honest opinion, they should be like they should be like the Monday Club should be like the ruling group in the Conservatives, and it should only how like. I mean, just abolish the Conservative Party, just call it the Monday Club Party. So, but
It
yeah,
certainly should. It should be the most important part of the Conservative Party for sure.
it should be
like,
what.
as we said, Cameron destroyed it.
Yeah, he destroyed it. I mean, really, what it should be is like you know how in America you have the GOP and you have like the Trump, I think what's it Bannon calls it the economic nationalists,
Yeah.
the Trump economic nationalists, and they're like over 70% of the party, and that's what the Monday Club should be with the Conservative.
Well, I don't know really, because I think what the Monday Club war was they were the holders of actual conservative doctrine. Because what you get all the time is people telling me and saying the Conservative Party don't have any doctrine. Well, no, they don't for practical purposes and haven't for many years. But the doctrine they should have held was the guys in the Monday Club.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, one of the biggest criticisms that the progressives like Cameron would levy against the people in the Monday Club was that they were, they couldn't adapt to the times, and they couldn't, they were irrelevant in the modern age, which of course was, the sigh, which was completely untrue, because one of the things, and I always thought was this was from the Monday Club, was they had even a whole plan of how to reimagine the Commonwealth and how Britain could interact with the Commonwealth, and how the Commonwealth could be sort of the legacy of the Empire could be reformed within the Commonwealth to have like a security bloc like exists with the French and their former colonies. And
well, I'm certainly a Kanzok supporter in that regard.
Yeah.
For the same reason. I mean, Kanzok is basically the old Commonwealth, apart from South Africa these days, which obviously wouldn't work these days because of the awful situation in South Africa.
I have a very unpopular opinion about. Well, not unpopular, but it's unpopular, I guess, within like normal society. But I think kicking the when it was the apartheid government, kicking them out of the Commonwealth was complete bullshit. They shouldn't have.
Look, mate, I moved to South Africa in 1985 when it was still the old white government. Although even by 1985, all of that petty apartheid stuff that people go on about, like separate toilets and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
99% of that was already gone in 1985. You just didn't have it.
I mean, when I click on videos, I remember because I did like a lot of background research into when I did a bit of background research into the sort of the apartheid government, especially towards the end. What you can see is it's basically just black Africans enforcing apartheid. So I mean, and the reason and cause you're looking into it, it does appear like because wasn't there like special dispensation for tribal territories in South Africa?
Yeah, loads of them. Yeah, there were loads of homelands that were self-governing for the most part.
Yeah,
and the Zulu, for example, I lived in Natal, which is next to Zululand, and I had many Zulu friends, and the Zulus they hate the ANC, they can't stand them. So
yes.
And they've been as oppressed by the ANC as have most South African whites, and increasingly most South African coloureds in the Cape, particularly. And the coloureds in South Africa, for anyone who doesn't know, are mixed race people. They're just called coloureds. They call themselves coloureds. And also, of course, in Natal, you have a very large Indian community as well. Durban, for example, which is the city I lived in 99, 2000, is the biggest Indian city outside of the subcontinent. So, and they don't like the ANC either. So there you go. But it's a lot more complicated than people think. And by and large, South Africa in 1985, well, I mean, it certainly was the most advanced, safe, and prosperous nation in Africa. It certainly isn't now. Or if it is, it's the legacy of the stuff that the white guys built there since the 1600s when the Dutch first arrived there. So, I mean, South Africa as a white nation is much older than it's much older than Australia, and it's at least as old as America or Canada.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a shame what's happened to South Africa, because it was it had a very it was a very it was a very successful part of the British Empire. People forget.
Well, it was also a very loyal part of the British Empire.
It was.
They were quick to join us in the First World War and the Second World War. They joined us in Korea, and Rhodesia even more so. So, I mean, Ian Smith himself was a RAF Spitfire pilot in World War II, for God's sake. So,
Yeah. Rival Limbaugh he's put like a thread here, so I just thought we'd go through it because it's quite interesting.
Me and Limbaugh have had this discussion. Like, Limbaugh and I are friends, and we've had this discussion, and he says that Tories love the idea of the Enlightenment, whereas Limbaugh is more of a
reactionary.
No, listen, I call myself a traditionalist reactionary, but I'm a British traditionalist reactionary, not a continental one. And Limbaugh is more of a traditionalist Catholic, I believe, it would be correct.
Right.
Or he'll correct me if I'm not right. But I think that would be his position. But Limbaugh is my friend, and I like him very much. And we just don't always agree on everything.
So I thought I'd just go through. So he says the problems with the Monday Club and all the quote-unquote base cons is that they held the ideas of Americanism, hard capitalism, and liberty. Yeah, sure, that goes against the communist agenda. However, is that material reactionary or right-wing? No, not really. Americanism or classical liberalism and the Enlightenment, aka Edmund Burke politics, is clearly against us, progressive cope. Hard capitalism is an Enlightenment cope which does not favour conservative ethos of community and localism. Unfortunately, like Duke says, Tories love the idea of Enlightenment liberty, not true old British liberty. So one of the things you have to remember with Burke, and this is what I always say to people, because again, Cameron does talk. Of one things that Cameron does know history-wise in politics is he knows Edmund Burke, and one of the things you have to remember with Burke is he was a Whig, okay, but one thing that, and I don't believe that he drastically changed his views on being a Whig, but one thing you have to remember is that he saw what was happening in France and he was horrified of it because it went against, I guess you could say that sense of traditionalism and dare I say community, because with the French Revolution, one thing that did happen, which is quite overlooked in some cases, is the revolutionaries went from they abolished like regional identity in France, just straight out, just
yes, they did.
They centralized it. So the equivalent would be in England, Cornish identity. Well, let's Devon or some sort of regional identity would just go, and everything would be centered around London, like what happened with Blair, like it's today. Oh, God.
Blair and Cameron,
Blair and Cameron, and so that. And so I always say with Burke is he's good at diagnosing the problem that Enlightenment thought has, because he actually, especially in the letters that the letters to the people of Paris, he basically, because the people of Paris basically just say, listen, we're basically creating what you created in 1688, and he's going, no, you're not. You're just destroying everything just for the sheer hell of it. You're not doing anything that happened in the Glorious Revolution.
Look, we're going very historical here again, but
I know.
I would just like to say a couple of things. I'd say, first of all, as Limbu knows, because we've discussed this in private, like I believe in the old idea of the freeborn Englishman, and later on the freeborn Briton, but that does not go back to the French Revolution or even the Enlightenment. It goes back far beyond that into the medieval era.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It goes back to Alfred the Great and the Wittens of the Anglo-Saxons. And certainly by the time of Henry V, the idea of freeborn Englishmen who were not serfs, because that stuff was abolished in England long before it was abolished on the continent and in France, for example, because of the Black Death, and also because of the fact it always never went very deep because it was only imported by William the Bastard. I go back to that stuff in terms of a traditional English and later on British liberties. And then, as you say, to some degree, 1688, although less in my case with that one. As right on Fez has just said, it can be worth distinguishing between the Scottish Enlightenment and the Continental Enlightenment. Issues with both, but the Scots were more in line with the traditional Anglo ideas. And again, I agree with that. So, yeah. But as I said, we're getting pretty historical again on the thing about progressive conservative.
Yeah. But the thing though is, again, when I just talk Cameron only references like Burke once, and I don't think he just doesn't understand, because he sort of gets to the Scrutonian position of Burke talking about freeborn Englishmen and the rights that come like that, and the fact that I think Scruton points out with what Burke was saying is that we have to it's our job to preserve the past, to hand it over to the people of the future, and creating like this great chain of civilization, and nothing, and we have to be like effectively like a.
But Scruton had a deep sense of English and British history, which I don't think most modern political people do.
No, and Cameron didn't. He didn't. He only understood the concept of the past, but not the past being the way that Scruton viewed the past. It was more, I guess you could say like boomer truth regime, if you want to quote it.
Well, look, if we're a tree and the branches of a tree and our children are the leaves, the history of England and Britain is the roots.
Exactly.
Is the way I feel it. It's just that simple. On Limbo is correctly saying in the chat that current Tories don't hold the position of freeborn Britons. No, they don't. But I'm not sure that you're right, Limbo, in saying that the Monday Club, certainly the Monday Club in the 70s and 80s, I don't think they'd been totally taken over by American views at that stage at all, which is one reason, for example, that in the 60s and the early 70s, they were very much supportive for Rhodesia, for example, which was not something most right-wing Americans were.
Yeah. It's hard to tell because, the thing is, one thing that is really bizarre with, like, you look at the history of the Cassette Pike, under Cameron, because I'll just get back to Cameron, because he came in, of course, he won the he won the leadership. In 2010, of course, you had that really bizarre leadership, and I remember it to this day because I remember watching it and just falling asleep watching it because it was just how in 2010 how utter crap it was. But effectively it was like, I agree with you, Gordon, and then it was like Gordon says, I agree with you, Dave. It's like, okay, and
Yeah,
I think it was like Alistair Stewart was like, do you guys?
you can't slide a piece of paper between the two policies.
Well, I mean, Alistair Stewart I think even he commentated on like the debate. He was like, he was like the presenter on that. He just said, do you disagree with him on anything? Like,
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, Nick Clegg was able to make a joke out of that, saying, "Look, they all agree on the same thing," and it was, and that's why he was sort of like did quite well in those leadership debates, because effectively, yeah, they agreed on, they all three of them agreed on the same thing, and they, and so you had like this hung parliament situation, as we mentioned before. There, Osborne was very keen on a liberal coalition even before the election. And Cameron was very much interested as well on that prospect. And
see, I would argue that had they stuck to a conservative position, they wouldn't have needed that coalition.
No, but the thing is, at that point there was no conservatives left, because of course, Blair, they were basically treading the sort of ruined battlefield that Blair had left behind in British politics. There was nothing left.
But I'm talking about ordinary voters here.
Ordinary vote. Yeah.
I think because there had been so long of a so-called New Labour government under Blair, who started off as a Trotskyist, I would remind people, when he was at university.
Oh, I think he's still a Trotskyist, in my opinion.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. But anyway, because they'd had 3 election cycles of those bastards, and excuse my language, by the way, and their endless wars and the endless British casualties for no reason whatsoever, as we now know. All those poor, very brave British soldiers died, like nearly 700 of them, and thousands more maimed and wounded under Blair and also under Cameron for no purpose whatsoever, and all the time the Royal Navy being shrunk in order to fund these wars in Central Asia for no bloody purpose. Because we'd had that for like a decade and a half or whatever it was. The Conservatives were going to win anyway, and had Cameron not come out with crap like legalizing gay marriage, I reckon the Conservatives would have won a majority on their own, because I think most average British voters, even the idiot ones, would have been sick of New Labour by then anyway.
Yeah, I think and this is something that I think Peter Hitchens even talked about it, is the further you get from the Blair, when Blair was in government, the further the sort of less chance you'll have of overturning Blair legislation. In 2010, if let's just say in the hypothetical that Cameron or someone came in and started dismantling what Blair did, at that point in time, it would have worked, and hang
on though. The British system, as I understand it, is that what one government does never binds a government after it. So any government coming after another government can dismantle the legislation of the government before it.
Sorry, could you repeat that bit? I didn't get the first.
So far as I understand the way the British system works, is that what one British government does not bind the succeeding British government to do the same thing. It doesn't. It never has.
Yeah, so that is correct. But the point is, and this is something that it's really important to remember, is Blair wasn't like your average prime minister before or even after.
I realise that. Yeah.
Because the thing is, and this is something that maybe gives you the sort of magnitude. You had like between 97 and 2001, you had like, what was it, 2,000 bills, like, or 200 bills a day. It was unprecedented.
Totally agree. How many of them did Cameron get rid of, if any?
Zero, literally zero. He
Right. When Alexander Johnson came in with an 80-seat majority, one of the biggest majorities there's ever been,
yeah.
certainly way since World War II. When he came in with an 80-seat majority, did he, for example, get rid of the ridiculous idea of a British Supreme Court?
No, and I that one of all the things, right? I would have thought, because the way they treated him and the way that they behaved during the whole Brexit thing, I would have thought he would have got rid of that just on a personal vendetta level, anyway.
Well, I mean, apart from the fact it just goes totally against the whole British Constitution.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah. It does. I mean, you have Ofcom, for example, is like one thing. You know, anything that Blair created, which is any bill, any legislation.
I mean, to your knowledge, has Alexander Johnson got rid of anything Blair created?
I'm just trying to think on that one.
Because I can't think of anything myself, but you may know more than I do.
You know, I would like to say, oh no, zero, but it's difficult because I know there have been amendments and there's been bills which have like superseded. So I honestly, I really couldn't tell you. Unless someone in chat can say, like, I would say very few.
Yeah, right on. Fez in chat is saying can't think of anything. I don't think there is anything.
I mean, I wouldn't use Brexit because that was. I mean, that's not of his decision, not of his.
Well,
will.
it's Brexit, and it's a half Brexit anyway. We're still tied into the EU on all sorts of things, including defence, which we should not be.
The only Conservative minister that I've actually ever, I've really only ever heard that was that really wanted to remove Blair legislation was Kemi Badenoch. She was actually quite down for it.
But it never happened.
Well, no, she was demoted. So yeah, I mean,
I wonder why.
And also because she also Kimberly Crenshaw, one of the top American critical race theorists. She did a debate with her, and she sort of wiped the floor with her. Limbo. I heard about. Now, this is the thing. I was going to mention this to Anjuk, but it hasn't happened yet, so I'm reserving judgment. I mean, listen. If Boris was to repeal the human rights bill, I would give him credit for that. Okay.
Yeah, so would I. If he repeals anything that Blair put in, I'd give him credit for it.
Yeah,
wouldn't make me like him, but I'd give him credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said, okay, okay, so he repeals, he repeals that. I'd applaud him. I'll say, well done, Boris. Good job. Anybody who in the party who criticises him for that, get the fuck out. Not because I endorse him, but because Conservatives and as over the lockdown issues, like him rolling back lockdowns, even to the point where you're not mandating it in the workforce. You have people like Tobias Ellwood and the Conservatives who are coming out the woodworks, who are enemies on that count, and they're coming out, wanting him gone, not because of Partygate or any of this. Because I don't think the public really care about it. It's completely astroturfed in its the narrative and its entirety.
Yes.
I mean, as you know, Andrew, if you were going to get rid of Boris, you're going to get rid of him on something more substantial, and we can think of things more substantial that he should go.
I'd get rid of him on the grounds of his idiot moronic thought of a wife. But I mean, you can't do that. No one elected her.
Carrie, do you know what she's called in Conservative WhatsApp groups? By the way,
I'm sure it'll be rude. Hopefully,
Carrie Antoinette. That's I can confirm. I have heard.
But that's a bit unfair because Marie Antoinette herself was not the nasty person who the lefty French portrayed. But there we go. I'm sure Carrie is, but Marie Antoinette was
the friend. She was referred to in the printing press at the time as the Austrian whore and stuff like that.
Yeah, she was, and she wasn't any of those things, and she never said "let them eat cake," for example. Complete myth.
I think it was just Germanic hostility towards Germanic peoples.
Well, they
So-
chopped her head off in the end when she was.
Well, yeah,
like,
they did. So,
which was a vile act, as far as I'm concerned.
well, I mean, yeah, again, you're going back to Burke. That's why all those people, like the Conservatives, the Whigs, and everything, they were like,
right on. Fez has got it right in the chat. What Carrie would say is, "Let them eat vegan, gluten-free cake." And
Actually,
Boris would probably say, "Yeah." I say Boris because that's his,
public name.
That's what people want him to be called. She probably calls him Boris. She probably calls him loads of things.
Do you know what I felt, which was the most disgusting display? And in the Wellington Project, we did a rival Conservative conference with actual Conservative members, party members on Twitter Spaces.
That would be good, actually.
And that was actually quite good because we actually had like a lot of interaction, and we had the Mallard people were around with us, and it was really good. And it was actually genuine discussions on like ideas and policies.
Good idea.
But the thing is, the reason we did it was on day one, the first thing of the Conservative Party conference, and it was the LGB Alliance versus the LGBT Alliance, and why the LGBT Alliance think the LGBT Alliance is transphobic because they don't recognize female penises. And I was just thinking, oh my God, this party.
But you can't have a female penis. If you've got a penis, you're a man pretending to be a woman. If you claim to be female and you have a penis, you're just a man pretending to be a woman, and that is just truth.
Well, I mean, there's communists pretending to be conservatives, so why not pretending to have a? I mean, there's one particular one who was hanging around when we were doing it with who they hang around with like not the Mallards, but notable right wing sort of conservative types who are, and I won't name the person, but let's just say that they purport to be a fan of Margaret Thatcher, and cross-dresser. And so I think some of you might know who I'm on about.
But look, as far as I'm concerned, I would never on my channel have a transvestite, i.e. a man masquerading as a woman. I just will not have one. I'm sorry. If you're that, that is sufficient for you not to be on my channel, because my channel is a conservative, traditionalist, reactionary channel. So no, sorry.
Yeah, and this particular person likes to hang around in conservative circles, and the media like to use this person as like a pin-up. Yeah, I mean, I always refer to them when I see them as the Rocky Horror Show of conservative politics, because it's pretty much what it is. I mean, I won't say he, because it's not she, it's a he. He blocked me, right?
I often call them it, to be honest.
Well, it blocked me, but yet it still hangs around when we do our Twitter Spaces and everything. And I'm as Robert Fez puts in the chat there, which I'm not going to bring up, but effectively, I just every time I see them pop up, I was like, no, just go. You have you're not bringing anything. You're spreading progressive bull crap. You love your neocons. You love your Blair. Get the fuck out. Just just get out. This is not the place for you. This is this is a based country,
Well, I wish it was a based country. I think some of the people in it still are the ordinary, average Anglo-Celtic Brits. I think Britain is not. I'm not a total black pillar. I think there are still a lot of based Anglo-Celtic Brits who are at least socially conservative. I think like we've got to change things soon, because we don't have long to do it. Because
the only way that they can, I mean, in my opinion, right, the only way, I'm just going to say it because this sort of like the logical conclusion of progressive conservatism and progressivism in the thing is they are explicitly, and this is not this isn't like my theory. This is just from their own words. They are anti-white, anti-people,
Oh,
anti-white.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I'm going to go bash Hillary, but they are openly hostile to people who are white, who are white British people.
I would say it's not even just that. It's that yes, what the idea behind all of the stuff that these people come out with, everybody from the centre left to the extreme left, and the vast, like Alexander Johnson at best is centre left at the moment, at best, and everyone from him leftwards. What they are is all white people are bad, and straight white men are always totally evil. That's just what it is, and you don't just get it in politics. You get it in the mainstream media all the time, every day. You get it on every TV show and series. You get it on almost every movie or film. And you even get it on most TV adverts every day.
Oh no, TV adverts. It's explicitly that. But one thing I mean, for me, I mean, it's very recent. I mean, I don't know if maybe I haven't noticed it, but I would say it was it sort of came around about. I mean, maybe if people could correct me, but I would say maybe like the 2010s, like the early 2010s. That's when things started to change. But see, I think a lot of it was. I mean, for example, a lot of this. Because when people talk about woke politics, a lot of people don't know really what woke means. They think it means like political correctness. Yes, but it's not just that.
It's more than that. Yeah.
Yeah, woke politics is basically race and gender communism. I think that was what Sargon refers to it as, and it's a very good tool because that's effectively what it is, and anti-white in that grouping as well.
It's not even just race. It's not even just race and gender communism. It's fundamentally against everything that Western civilization ever stood for.
Yeah, indeed, it's a very subversive bit, and I mean, and then what they do is, of course, it's like the victim card is always like, because they always give the intersectional part of it, which was explained in the critical race theory sort of doctrine, is they have to pick like the smallest group, and then ever expand outwards so it encompasses more groups, and you then have like this hierarchy of victimhood structure and all that sort of stuff.
Which, by the way, straight white women are very soon going to be thrown out of totally, and following them not long behind will be white gay men.
Yep, and then you'll have black men, and
it'll like you say, it'll move down. Just to answer right on Nimbu in the chat, he said anti-white. You mean a person who wants to use their sexual identity rather than cultural or ethnic? The point is, Limbo, that I would say like 99.975% of people who are male and want to pretend to be women will also be anti-white.
There is definitely a crossover, but the thing that is
a huge crossover.
So the thing that I would say to the right under Limbo here is like, when you hear these people talk, like especially on social media, they would happily. And they just laugh and joke, and they just love the idea of the white British population being a
minority in their own.
Well, not even a minority, just ceasing to exist. Yeah. And a lot of that comes from like Americanized style politics, which I think you mentioned, Ryan Limber mentioned earlier, that a lot of this comes from America. And this is something that they really, really get off on.
For sure.
And this is something that has unfortunately come across because I mean let's be honest, we are like a vassal to the American empire, if we should call it that.
I hate to say that, but and in some ways we're not, but yes, in many ways we are. So
I mean, financially, militarily, like NATO wise, trouble as we are, and we shouldn't be. And I think that will change within your lifetime, Iron Duke, because I think America is.
Well, if you're talking within my lifetime, and I'm an old bastard, you're talking maybe 20 years at most. So, we'll see. I'm not so sure about that.
I don't know, because the thing though is, I think it's America is unraveling at the seams in like in a very, very fast way that I think it's going to. I don't think it's going to continue. And I don't think like a Trump. I don't think even. I mean, Trump. He's not going to save it. There's nothing that can save the.
Look. There's still a lot of good people in America. I think one of the things people on the right sometimes make a mistake of is they say, "Oh, this is all the Americans' fault." Well, yes, on one level you can argue that, but it's not most of the ordinary American people. To be fair.
Yeah.
Any more than the nonsense that people come out with on the biased brainwashing corporation in UK is anything really to do with most average British people. It isn't, most average British people do not want to see Henry V perform with black actors. It's because it completely removes your immersion because it's nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I get from like Limbard and Evidin, sorry, your username's incredibly difficult to pronounce, but from these chaps, obviously, I think they're viewers of yours as well. This is the thing: is what they're saying here is just it's right. It's absolutely 100% right, because the problem is the talking points of white being the oppressors and then blacks, minorities. It's all Americanism. It has no bearing on us. And what's great about it is because it's Americanism, it's not even our problem. It's not like the British people's problem, because if America was to, the whole structure of America and the American empire was to collapse, in many ways it would, I know that some people might not like the idea. It would actually be quite good for us, because it then means that
we'd have to spend a lot more on defense, that's for sure.
Well, we definitely would, but all it means is that Americanism in the country would, I would believe it would be a point where you could easily just obliterate it. I think you could easily obliterate it with the right thing, because as this point of view, right, is I think this is the majority British point of view. They don't view them. They know they're not French. They know they're not German. They know they're not Pole. They know what they are, and they know their roots. And because of like family and familiarity and localism, they know what it is. It is a tangible, real thing that they can. They might not be able to articulate it in specific terms, but they know what it is.
Real British people are Anglo-Celtic.
Yeah,
it's that simple. Real Aboriginal British people are Anglo-Celtic.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, again, one of the leftist copes is, you're in favour of monarchy. Well, all your monarchs are foreign, and I'm like, excuse me, the Tudors are not foreign. They are native to this island.
Yeah, they were Welsh largely.
They're Welsh, and whatever you think of the House of Windsor. They are descendants. They're descendants of the Windsors and the House of Stuarts, who are also Stuarts, so native to this isle.
Scottish, yep.
Scottish. So, we are, okay, yes, German mix in there, but still,
Well, the Anglo-Saxons started off as Germans. Let's be honest.
Yeah, German. So there is like a continuous, cycle, in that. But going back to Cameron. When he came in with his coalition partners, his goal was none of these things. It was basically, this is what happened before. This is what we're going to do now. It was basically just
carrying on Blair.
It was carrying on, and his justification in progressive conservatism is him and Osborne wanted to conserve the order that Blair had created, because they believed it was so wonderful.
Just let me say this one point. Like, the idea of progressive conservatism is a bit like patriarchal feminism.
Yes.
It's just ridiculous. It's nonsense talk, and of course the masters of nonsense talk are the left. So
Yeah. And of course, so someone like Cameron and Osborne, they were never allies, and they never worked in any interest for anyone who would describe themselves as conservatives. And also I mean, one of the things is their biggest crimes in all this is they devalued the name of being conservative because of their actions. When it came to 2015 and that period in between, we talked about the same-sex marriage. You had the continuation of the Equalities Act, under them
yep.
continuing. You had various
not one step to the right, not even a half step to the right. Nothing.
not one insular sort of bit to the right. They just
in fact, a step to the left because legalized homosexual marriage.
Yeah, homosexual marriage. And they I mean, one of their apart from that, they were and the only thing that they actually really came into conflict with their coalition partners and Liberal Democrats was the student tuition fees. That was the only thing. There was really nothing else. That and also the EU referendum. One thing, and this was the thing, is when the homosexual marriage went through, the right of the party were, and I do remember this, there were many in my association across the country that just left, and the ones that stayed were quite disorientated, and they were quite I mean, I would describe them as like survivors coming out of a nuclear explosion. They were just completely bewildered with what had happened around them because they really couldn't believe it. And because I remember a lot of these conservatives, especially MPs at the time, were just standing up in Commons and saying, "Okay, but if we allow same-sex marriage, what's the moral objection for allowing a child to marry an adult?"
Well, I mean, listen, I don't think this is even controversial these days on the right. That's the whole point of it. Look, the left have been moving towards legalizing pedophilia for years, and look in the Labour Party today. There are quite senior women in the Labour Party today, Harriet Harman, who were heavily involved in the boy man, whatever it's called, nonce crap.
Exchange, paedophile exchange stuff,
paedophile exchange and all this, and they're still Labour MPs.
Yeah, of course, though, because that is the natural sort of end of leftist, philosophy. Though it's total because for them, they when it comes to the revolution never ends because the revolution is always a cultural revolution of breaking down the order, breaking down the structure that society had that we had inherited from our forefathers, from our the Christian society of before.
And let's be honest, that is just. Look, I'm an agnostic, but I'm a cultural Christian for sure. And like I used to be an atheist, I'm sure not now, because like most atheists these days are left-wing scum.
Yes.
One reason I changed. But, children are supposed to be protected. They are not supposed to be abused. And that is what we are moving towards, not only with this every move they've made from homosexual marriage, but also with stuff like little 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds being allowed to transition, for God's sake, because they have some feminist mother who wants them to, because it sure ain't their choice.
Well, of course not. And this is it's really funny because one of the sort of maybe the right should talk about this MP more often, but William Wilberforce, because of course he's been co-opted by the left because slavery and all that, but he voted for the Tories as they were then, because he was an independent. I think he sat mainly as an independent or like non-partisan, but he voted on quite a bit of legislation for the Tories in the day.
Well, I mean, look, you've got to realise that, like, slavery in the modern era, and I'm talking in historical terms here, was never really legal in England.
Yeah, that was his contention. That's why he.
It was never really legal. In fact, there was a High Court judgment. I can't remember now. I think it was in the 1770s.
Yeah, it's a slave called Somerset, and he was
and the judge turned around and said, "Look, the air of England is too free. You can't be a slave in England. It's just not possible."
Because
we never had slavery in England itself, or Britain itself,
it went back to, I think it was actually like the judge referenced Magna Carta as like, because there is actually a clause on the slavery, serfdom, and freeborn, and the freeborn rights, because this particular man, he was born, I think, in technically within British territory. So that was like the sort of the underpinning clause of that. But on the William Wilberforce I was getting at was, one of the other things he did, which is sort of less known, was he helped to abolish child sex workers in England. Like you had like 11-year-old, as young as like 11, 7-year-old girls on the streets at that in the 18th century.
That continued right through the 19th century as well. People getting rid of that stuff, just as at the same time. In the 19th century, Britain had the most advanced animal welfare rules in the world and laws at the same time. And in fact, British animal welfare laws had to be weakened when we were in the EU.
Indeed. And it's like on abattoirs and such. I mean, it was. I remember how in especially where I lived in Devon, it was massively controversial because a lot of abattoirs were just like forced to close down, and you had animals being carted off across continents, sure enough, and
and horses being exported across to Belgium to be butchered for food and all this kind of stuff.
I know, it was absolutely.
We don't eat horses. We never have.
No, it was absolutely disgusting behavior. I mean, the result of globalism is,
right on. Nimbu's asking a question here that you might know the answer to, Alsha. He was saying, was it not a traditional Conservative MP, Edward Lee, who consoled with a pedophile? I know nothing about this. Do you?
I've heard that. I've heard that being pointed out before. I think what saying is correct, though I need to check on it. I've always been, because I've heard about that some time ago, and I just haven't followed up on it because I don't follow Edward Lee that much. Though because of that particular issue, I don't like to take great interest in him because of his politics, because of something like that. Also, Right Honourable Fez. He mentioned earlier that Steve Baker. I don't trust Steve Baker. Steve Baker has, and this going back to my progressive view on race point that I mentioned earlier. Steve Baker recently came out in an interview, and this isn't just like the first time, because I know in this one he walked it back a bit, but he sort of doubled down as well. He did like a walk back and doubled down, but he's done several points during the BLM stuff, right? He actually gave the BLM narrative some credence, and and I know some people on the Discord, like the Wellington Project and such, like some people say, I had a bit of a sort of a very heated discussion, let's say, where it was like, oh no, but it was 2 years ago, and it's like, I don't care. Like literally, how the fuck? Okay, can you call yourself a conservative or someone who's?
It was a complete import from America that had nothing whatever to do with Britain. Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. But you stand there, right? And Colston statue being torn down by a mob and chucked in the river. Is that okay? Is that cool?
Surely one of the worst things was that they got off when they went to court.
Oh yeah, because activist judges, activist lawyers.
I mean, the judge, in my opinion, should have said, "Look, you've got to convict these people because they did do it."
Yeah, but the thing is,
That's
it became like
all he needed to do was to do that, and that would have been the end of it.
yeah. But the trouble is, he invited that like black historian who's like a massive
Oh
racist
God,
anti.
not that Kindy person.
That's right. That's the one.
Oh
And a
God.
massive racist, and did like it talks about like they put like Colston on historical trial, and the thing though is right is because of that it's I don't want to sound like some libtard pundit, but it is actually quite dangerous for Britain's democracy. Okay, I really don't.
Oh God, be careful there. Man.
I don't want to sound like a leftist lib. I don't want to sound like one of those sort of like libtards. But the reason I say that,
I'm not a Democrat, by the way. Let me
no,
explain.
I'm not a Democrat either. But what I was getting at is, um, when when you open sort of Pandora's box to different ways, because the thing that is the current elites, right, and this was all elite sort of the elites doing what they want of like erasing history. During Black Lives Matter scenario, the elites went from, I think Academic Agent points it out really perfectly, where it was about they briefly abandoned persuasion techniques and just use use of force. And the use of force in this case was the mob. It wasn't like a military or paramilitary. It was just,
I mean, we all watched the cops running away from Black Lives Matter. Beating up families who were protesting against lockdowns. We all saw that.
Yeah. I mean, and for me, that's where that was when I had a very serious like a 180 turn in my political, because I during the lockdown stuff, during the first bit up until summer, I was sort of, I was never against lockdowns at the start of it. I will be honest. I was never like, no, I'm against this. On this,
I was always against the whole of it, basically.
Well done you. Because the thing was, I wasn't. I mean, when it came to the disease, I just wasn't. It was being played out in the media as being like the next Justinian plague, so I sort of accepted it as a. I was like, oh, maybe it is. I don't know. Because you had all those videos of China and like Iran and all these people dropping down dead.
Well, you will have seen the video that I think several of them have gone up now. According to a Freedom of Information Act thing. Only 17,500 people died in Britain. Only.
I saw that one. Yeah, I did see that
and
one.
The latest one that came out, like only a couple of hours before we did this stream, was that there's been a survey done, and they reckon that of those 17,500, a whole 0.2% was saved because of all the lockdowns.
And I bet you like 99% of those that died, that 17,000, were people in care homes.
The vast majority were over 65 years old. Yeah, absolutely.
I would say even like over 80. I reckon.
Well, even more were over 80. But actually, if you look at the Freedom of Information Act thing, that's how they did it. They said up to 65 and then over 65, and I'm sure that was done on purpose as well. But basically, like the American CDC admitted fairly recently that well over, because that was what they said, well over 75% of the people who died from the China virus in the USA had at least 4 comorbidities. So they had at least 4 other things wrong with them before the China virus could kill them. And they said well over 75%, which of course could be 90%. That's the way they phrased it, and I'm sure they phrased it that way on purpose. So I mean, all of that stuff. But meanwhile, down in Aussie, like I'm down under these days, and
you live in Australia?
Yeah, I live in Australia.
Good morning to you then.
Yes, and sadly, I live in just outside Melbourne, which is the most locked down place in the whole world. And because we have a nice socialist dictator, Dan Andrews, it's still full on here, mate. It's not stopping here. It is not stopping here yet. In fact, the latest one they've done in Australia is in one part of Australia, if parents are not vaccinated and their children are in hospital, they will not be allowed to see them, even if they're dying. And there were actually media commentators, quite a lot of them, so-called journalists, coming out on many channels and saying, yeah, I totally agree with this, because it will make people get vaccinated. So what they're saying is, if you're like, I've never taken this experimental vaccine that settles in women's ovaries and everyone's bone marrow, never taken it, but and I never will. And they're basically saying, if you're a mother or a father and your little kid is dying in hospital, you won't be allowed to see them if you've not been vaccinated. And you have commentators saying, yeah, I think that's good. Like, this is how far down 1984 we've gone. It's just.
I think all of it is a social experiment to see how far the elites can get the population to do.
Well, then they must be very pleased, because they can go a long, long way. A long, long way.
And on that topic, because I'll probably wrap it up shortly, but I thought it's worth mentioning.
Mate, I was just going to say to you, I can give you 15 minutes now.
Yeah, we'll give it. Okay, so we'll just talk about Canada. I think we have to, because in this stream we're going to have to talk about the truckers situation in Canada, because that one has come out of the blue from nowhere for me. I did not see this. I heard about rumblings in Canada about like a convoy sort of protest, but I just thought it would amount to sort of nothing. But it's actually been quite a big thing over there, to the point where Saddam Trudeau has gone off and is hiding in a hole somewhere.
Yep. He ran away. Yeah.
He literally did a Ceausescu, didn't he?
Even worse, because Ceausescu was actually, they did find him, but no, he just ran away. But then, what a surprise! I mean, he's a soy boy bugman. I mean, he is the soy boy bugman.
I tell you what, I don't care what people say. I do not believe that elections in Canada are as honest as made out.
Look, what you've got to realize about Canada is that Ontario particularly has a very large proportion of the population. So does Quebec. And as far as I understand, and as I say, I've got Canadians in my Discord, and I've known Canadians for donkey's years, including some who fought for years to get the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force back, because they were abolished under Trudeau's father, I believe. And just made Canadian Armed Forces. And they have now got those back after like a decades-long fight. There are many based Canadians, but a lot of them live in like
Alberta.
Yeah, well, they live in the prairie states, like the Midwest of Canada.
Midwestern, yeah.
Yeah, like the East Coast is like America and very left wing. And the West Coast, well, not all of it actually. Some of what's it called? I'm trying to remember that. Halifax and around that area is not totally left wing, but a lot of it, certainly around Ontario and the capital city, is very left wing, and the extreme West Coast is also pretty left wing. Yeah. Yeah. But the guys in the middle, there's still quite a lot of base Canadians in the middle who are ignored. But they are not the majority of the population, sadly. Because Canada, like Britain, has a huge mass immigration policy. In fact, maybe even worse than ours.
This was something that was been talked about in our circles, and I think why, because people say, well, how has this Canada, the truckers thing come about? And I think what's happened is that the Canadian population have been, I know that the left would say gaslit, but let's just say lied to, just openly lied to, in a narrative which they just can't believe, because it's not believable. They were lied to about COVID and the risks of COVID, like everyone nationally, but then also you had that weird the Native American school graves, where in the spot left. Do you remember that? Do you remember that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. The Canadians were deliberately executing all these Canadian Indians which is such a load of
It
bollocks. It's
literally like
unbelievable.
order 60, like 66, ordering all these Native American,
Where can I ask you something, Al Shalatori? You may know this. Where did Sitting Bull and the Sioux go after they had defeated Custer and the 7th Cavalry at Little Bighorn? Where did they go?
They I think they went to, what was it? I guess was it the province of Upper Canada?
Yeah, they went to Canada.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the Canadians sent along a Mountie officer and about like 30 blokes, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police guys. And they rode up to Sitting Bull in this huge Sioux camp, which had butchered the 7th Cavalry. And the Canadian guy basically turned around and said to Sitting Bull, "Will you keep the Queen's peace, i.e. Queen Victoria's peace?" Because Canada was a British dominion. And the Sitting Bull said, "Yeah, of course I will." And he did. And these two guys, the Mountie officer and Sitting Bull, became mates over the time the Sioux were there. This is how terrible the Canadians treated the North American Indians or the Native Americans.
Even when the British were there, I mean, the relationship between Native...
The British were still there in the 1870s. The last British campaign in Canada was in 1873, I think. So it was still very much like part of the British Empire. And that's why the Canadian Mounties wear red coats, And they fled to Canada because they knew the Canadians wouldn't attack them.
Yeah, because unlike in America, you didn't have I guess you say people arriving like a sort of I don't want to say massive, but not like massive, but mass like settlement.
Well, you did have mass settlement, but there was like no history. There were no great Indian wars in Canada.
Not on the things. If you look at some of the stats, especially
there were a few skirmishes. Absolutely, there were a few skirmishes, but there were no like big Indian wars. There was no like Canadian Army guys charging into Indian villages and slaughtering people, which the Americans did on a regular basis.
But what I was saying was like it wasn't on a like in Canada. It wasn't like on the scale with like after the Louisiana Purchase. Let's say from like 1805 to 1830, like you had like in what was now modern Kentucky, within a matter of 10 years, you just had like what was it? It was like a population of 10,000, and then it just like 1 year later it was 22,000, and then just drastically.
Yeah, no. I see your point entirely, but
that's what I mean. Because of course
you're slightly misunderstanding what I'm trying to get at here. What I'm trying to point out is that this idea that the Canadians were awful to the Native Americans.
Oh yes,
bullshit. Yes. They just weren't. I mean, some Native American children died as young people, but if you go around any cemetery in Canada or Britain or Australia or New Zealand or indeed in America, if you go around any cemetery between about 1890 and 1920, you will find a hell of a lot of children's graves.
But this
kids used to die back then.
We at the time, I forgot her name, Laura something or other, who's a Canadian.
I know the one you're talking about. Lauren Southern, yeah.
So Laura Southern, she actually, to her credit, debunked this quite easily because she just reviewed it. Because she said, right, okay, so number one, mass graves weren't found. Okay,
it was just that all they found is forgotten cemeteries.
Yeah, this was it. The property that was used, they found bones where they were going to be building, and it turned out actually this was a grave. Oh, these are children bones. Oh, this used to be a native school. Yes, and she said, but this the area that this was in. This is where Native Americans lived in. Of course, they would be native children and native adults because that's where they fucking lived.
It was just forgotten cemeteries. They were ordinary one-person graves. No one killed them. They died. And they're just forgotten cemeteries. They're not mass graves at all. It's crap.
And what happened as a subsequent result is you had churches and this is the thing, right? Because the media narrative that was on the international media front that was on this the justification for church burning was you had like Native American, I say Native American, the native, the indigenous population were going around burning churches, going, down with Christianity, return to.
I wonder. I also wonder how much of that burning was done by Native Americans and how much of it was done by
Zero.
white people.
Zero. So it was done by white
people. Yeah.
It was done by white leftist atheists because, as one Canadian pointed out to me at the time, when they were, because a couple of them were actually caught, doing it, and they were arrested. I don't know what happened after, whether they were prosecuted or something. But the point was, the communities they went to were native communities, and they were burning down, like in some cases, native churches, right? So, you also had on this lie, Trudeau, being the little fucking soy boy that he is, decided on government buildings the flag should be put at half mast, and then I think it was in Alberta, I think it was Alberta province. I can't remember which province it was, but of course you had the statue of Queen Victoria.
Yeah, I know.
And that was, and that angered a lot of Canadians because there is a sizable monarchist population.
Well, these were also Catholic churches that they mainly are complaining about, and of course Queen Victoria had nothing to do with the Catholic Church.
Well, yeah, because I remember there was one. I was interacting with this one Canadian like leftist, and she wanted me to explain to her how Queen Victoria wasn't involved, and I just said, "Listen, retard, Reformations, Church of England, Catholic Church, figure it out." Like these people are just off the wall, fucking stupid.
You might be able to somehow or other, really pushing it, try and say that Queen Victoria had something to do with the Anglican Church, but she had nothing to do with the Roman Catholic Church.
Absolutely not. Absolutely. And if
mate, I've got one more thing I want to bring up briefly before you finish. But I just need to let my little dog out, so I'll be back in like 30 seconds.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. So. We discussed as much as progressive conservatism, and the stuff with Canada, like the truckers and everything, is the response from was Erin O'Toole just like zero. There was no response because he's fully bought into the narrative, he's fully bought into the system, and I mean, as a tactical thing, like if you were a conservative, right, and let's just say you were just like, even if you didn't believe in all the core tenets that we talked about this evening, you would think you would have at least some common sense to realize, okay, these people who are pissed off, these are our core voter base because they're the people who are motivated, politically motivated, who hate Trudeau. Trudeau is our opponent in Parliament. So, logic would determine that if we want to get seats in Parliament, we would need him. And they do nothing. And it's like, I genuinely believe that these people just exist just to prop up Labour in this country, or the Liberal Party in Canada, or the Labour in Australia, and such. They're there just to prop up the opposition, the opposition parties. And it doesn't matter if the Conservatives are in power because they're not really in power. They're Labour or Liberals are in power.
Don't change anything.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, what do you want to raise?
Just the last thing is Alexander Johnson's insane net zero policy.
Yes.
Which is like, it's completely watermelon green, i.e. green on the outside and communist socialist red on the inside. And Britain, even today, produces less than 1% of all the emissions in the world. So reducing that less than 1% to nothing will make no difference to the world whatsoever. Even on the most stupid climate models, it will make no difference, particularly when you have China building 200 new coal-fired power stations, and India also doing the same, and nations like Indonesia, etc., also doing the same. It's just nonsense. All it's going to be is like loads of grannies and granddads freezing to death every winter because they can't pay their electricity bills because the green energy is so bloody expensive. and so inefficient that you're going to get power cuts all the time. And also you could go on about the fact that most people won't be able to afford to have an electric car because they're too expensive. And even if you can have one, they can't go anywhere. It's just utter nonsense. And the main point I wanted to bring up was that Nigel Farage, who has a record on these things, has recently started talking about he wants to campaign for a referendum on the net zero policy. And I totally support that idea. Because at the very worst, it's going to make people realize how bloody expensive and how many old people it's going to kill every winter.
Yeah, but the trouble is, I mean, as some of you may know, I'll say this, I mean, I'm currently running to be a Conservative councillor in England. I've actually got I'm at that sort of stage where I'm at the sort of final hurdle to get that approval. But one of the things which I think may do me in is I was asked at a in-person meeting, because I said, like, on the form, what's one thing you really disagree with on sort of national government level, and I actually talked about I put the green agenda. I didn't put net zero. I just put green agenda as a whole.
Yeah.
I wanted, because I knew that would come up, because the local Conservative council is committed to to the green agenda and all that sort of stuff, and I explained to them, because they said, well, this has to be, because again they sort of fell into the Blairite language.
We have to do this.
We have to do it. We have to do it.
Why do we have to do it?
And I said, I just said to her, I turned around and said, where are we getting the lithium batteries from when it runs out? Where is it? It's Afghanistan. Yeah. We have no longer control. We don't have the empire. What are we going to do?
Even if you have lithium batteries, you cannot store so-called green, clean energy. You can't store it.
Yeah, and I also said, like
all of these bird slaughtering wind farms they have everywhere, which not only slaughter thousands of birds every year, but also are eyesores on the landscape.
They rust. They rust away easily, and they have to be replaced. And they don't produce much. Solar panels are useless. I just said to them,
England is not known as being the sunniest country in the world, is it?
No, I'm sure in Saudi Arabia, some panels, and this is unironic, right? On a council report, they quoted about the sun panels being used in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And I just thought, yes, I bet they do work well in Saudi Arabia. I would be shocked if they didn't work well in Saudi Arabia, right? But I said what I would like this country to be is economically independent. No, environmentally energy independent.
Yeah.
I don't want us to be relying on importing energy, because we castrate ourselves with ridiculous notions of net zero, which is, I just turned around and I said, I mean, let's be honest. I just said to her, do you know who thought this policy up? And she was like, well, it's Boris Johnson and his team. And I was like,
right.
I said, no, it was a 30-year-old socialist who worked in a New York bar, who was joined the Democratic Socialist Party, who was fast-tracked to Congress, and who makes a regular arse of herself in public in America. And she came up with the thing called Green Deal, where she basically wanted to abolish cows and airplane travel. That is where you're getting your narrative from. That is where you're getting your agenda from. So that's why I don't think I'm going to get my council seat, because I was like, I sort of got a bit too, got a bit too cross with them. But I said, listen,
run as an independent. If you don't, that's what you should do.
I think I will. I think I might run as independent if not. Or I might even contact the Reform Party. Is it Reform Party?
Go for one of those guys.
I've always said that if I don't get the Conservative one, I might just contact the Reform Party and
you might find a lot of support, because, as Right on Fez says, the wind turbines. Evidensania, I beg your pardon, says windmills on every hill protecting the environment, even as they slaughter birds and bats and make everywhere look ugly. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
And
I
and
know.
and all you're going to have in a country like UK is like every single bloody hill you can find covered in these vile eyesores that butcher thousands of birds all the time. And because you can't store it and they're very inefficient and sometimes the wind doesn't blow, you're going to have brownouts and blackouts all the time. And like I said, because energy will be like 3-4 times what it costs now, you're going to have loads of dead grandmas and granddads every single winter because they can't
Yeah.
afford to heat their homes anymore.
I mean, the only way, if you wanted to go down through, like I just said, to be honest, there's only one route if you want net zero.
Nuclear.
Nuclear energy. That's the
Yep,
only
yep.
way. There's nothing else.
And even then, I wouldn't support it because listen, I absolutely would support more nuclear power stations because they are very safe these days.
Yeah.
And one thing Britain still has is good engineers. But that's not going to solve your problem with cars. And the electric cars are never going to work in Britain. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to, I think AA did a good video on this, is that at the same time as they're trying to make us have vastly less energy than we have now by moving to green, so-called sustainable energy, they also want to make the drain on it twice as big by making everyone try and plug in electric cars all the time. It's just a nonsense.
Yes, indeed.
It's just a nonsense, and I do not understand how anyone who calls themselves a conservative party, as Alexander Johnson's lot do, can possibly come out with this as a policy. It's nonsense.
Well, I mean, as I said, these people are just—they're not plugged in. They are. I mean, that the NPC, they are like they're beyond NPC. They're just really, they're not even not playing. They're just not. They're a character in it, just not even connected to anything, because they just do not have any sort of concept of what's going on or any power or any politics. And this is the thing. Like, I think the Conservative Party, and it needs to be run. It can't be run by, like, it has to be run by a dictator. Okay, and then they have to. Because the thing is, if there was, I always said that if there was like because one of the problems I think is they have no leaders. Like, Cameron wasn't leader because he wasn't in control, and I've been thinking about power and authority. And the thing is, the reason why Thatcher, I think, even for yourself, because you're able to identify with Thatcher in some regard, and people watching here as well, and people around the country, is because I think I think Thatcher had authority. Whether she had power or not, in the grand scheme of things, I don't know, because I wasn't around at that time, so I can't really definitively say.
She had enough power to fight the Falklands War, which I don't think any of the rest of her cabinet would have done without her.
Yes, that's why I'm thinking she did have. I mean, she definitely had authority, but she and power. But the thing is, every Conservative after that had none. And then, of course, when you had Blair, I mean, he definitely had power and authority, because he was the one that changed, who turned the tables on what power and authority meant. And and today, Blair's power and authority still presides in government through NGOs, through think tanks, through
none of which the Conservatives have done the least thing to try and change. Not
exactly.
one.
Yeah, and also civil service, hiring practices, all of it is just everything was in Blair's.
Well, I mean, even like the civil service, with all the stuff that comes in about quotas for women and for various ethnic minorities and this kind of stuff. Yeah. Nothing is done to ever reverse that. So we can only keep going left, no matter what government we have.
I mean, just to give you how bad it is, I don't know if you heard about what happened in Wales, but the Conservatives in Wales, the Welsh government, the Welsh Parliament, have basically declared that all members need to sign a pledge of diversity, of dedicating themselves to improving diversity and inclusion, right?
Does that mean that some of them will have to go and get transgendered?
Well, the thing is, But what
Because
happens
if that was the case, I'd probably support it just for the laugh of it, to be honest.
I mean, it'd be funny because I like to, the conservatives. What you're going to do, but also one thing is I think was pointed out by I think it was Sir Desmond Swain, because he was again they tried it in the UK Parliament at the same time, and Sir Desmond Swain saying, but what happens if my constituents want to vote a racist in? Because they do have the right to do that, in theory. What are you going to do?
Well,
then?
they should have the right to do that, as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly.
I mean, I think all humans are racist. But as I said to you ages ago on this stream, I had a fair number of Zulu friends. Trust me, Zulus are just as racist as anyone else. They're just racist in favor of Zulus.
I was born and I lived abroad. I was brought up a good portion abroad, and I lived in a Middle Eastern country, and I can tell you for a fact, between Christian and Muslim groups that I know, they are definitely racist with each other.
Yep.
Well, I wouldn't say racist. They were definitely in-group preference was a very real thing, and maybe that's why I identify very closely with being British and everything, because I knew that I wasn't part of that group. I knew that my group was within the British group, and so that's maybe that. I mean, that's why I'm a very patriotic person, because I understood the I understood the importance of identifying as British. I understand that people like to also I'm English and everything, and yeah, that's important. But where we live, we had Scots, we had Welsh, we had Northern Irish Ulstermen, and so British was more practical in that time,
Well, I'm an Englishman first, but I'm also a Briton.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I'm English, but for me, I'm always British first, maybe English second. I don't know. I know that some people don't like that, but I'm not saying I'm not English. Of course, I'm English, but I identify stronger with the British.
No. Look. I tell you, like I've got like my mother, for example, was born in Southern Ireland, but her father was a Welshman, and my father's family is almost all English, but there's a little bit of Scottish in it. So I am literally British, but I'm an Englishman first, because if someone says, "What are you?" I tell them, "Well, I'm an Englishman." And I'll be an Englishman until I draw my last breath. But I'm also a Briton.
Yeah, let's say if when we were abroad, like when we met someone who was like Scottish in the military, it was mainly in the military, right? And you had you walked into a restaurant and you had like a Scottish family, and then you had like Arabs, Israelis, Turks, Greeks, Orthodox as such. You would go towards Scottish family because they're the people that would understand you, because
I lived in Scotland for a little while and had a Scottish girlfriend, so I got no problem with Scots.
Yeah, but that's the thing, because one thing you find very quickly when living abroad is how radically different people are, but also how radically similar English and Scots are, to the point where in reality it's just formalities and names. It's not, you're not really that different.
I tell you how it generally goes. Well, in my experience, how it generally goes is in a row between the English and the Scots will stick together more than the English do. Or the Welsh will stick together more than the English do, or the Northern Irish or the Southern Irish will all stick together more than the English do. That is generally the way it goes. I will say that. Yeah. Although, if you're then going to talk about some complete foreigner, like outside of the islands, then we're more likely to stick together.
Yeah, I mean, I also think maybe it's like a cultural, because again, where I live, it was the border between East and West, like Christendom, and it predates Christianity. I mean, it's like the Roman Empire and the Parthian society, the East to West divide, and it's something that's very real, and the people in the East, they're just different. They're just it's crazy how different it is. Just different society it is.
Sure. Totally agree.
I think we'll wrap it up here. It's a pretty good discussion I think we had here, actually.
Yeah, it was pretty wide ranging. I don't know how much we got into progressive conservatives, but we did a bit.
We did do a bit.
And certainly I hope we pointed out to people it's a nonsense in more ways than one.
I hope that this would you could use what we talked here, and then if you see like on TV an MP who falls into the trap or starts talking and framing ways that Cameron took from Blair, you were able to say, okay, that MP is either we can't use him. He's not to be trusted. He's not a friend. Okay, he's not someone that is good for our team in the long run. And
do you mind if I shill something before we go?
No, certainly go for it.
All right. I mean, obviously, I do my regular streams on Saturday evenings, Splendid Isolation, which are basically just British Commonwealth takes on the news, right-wing British Commonwealth takes on the news and current events. But the main one I'd like to shill is that next week, not this week, next week, on probably Wednesday or Thursday evening, UK time, I am finally going to do the stream I've been promising for ages on John Charmley's book, Splendid Isolation. And John Charmley's book's full title is Splendid Isolation, British Foreign Policy, 1874 and 1914. So it will be particularly looking into how Britain got dragged into World War One, which, as far as I'm concerned, that's the original sin of Britain and the Empire. We'll also be looking at what I consider to be the last real Conservative Prime Minister, i.e. Lord Salisbury, up until about 1902. And I think, hopefully, that will be an interesting stream that people might want to check out.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. It's there's a World War One is a very interesting thing, especially the reconstruction of Europe after World War One has been, I think that's been like the most, I would say, the number one disaster.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have happened if Britain had not been in the war. And well, look, all right, this is obviously my humble opinion, but I think without Britain in 1914, France would have lost in 1915. And I don't think it would have been very much worse than what happened to France in 1870.
No. But also, having said that, the Kaiser, or the German, as I say, not the Kaiser, the German imperial government sending, sort of Ukrainian mustache man, let's say, to Russia, was again. I know people like to bash Woodrow Wilson, and he deserves his bashing.
But my point is, if Germany had not have been,
they wouldn't have needed to have done that.
Yeah, if they were not losing the war by 1917, they wouldn't have needed to do that. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it was a complete disaster, and not again. The narrative that we have about the Blair's sort of thing. It's not even Blair's thing, but it's like the idea of progress. The Whig view on history. Oh, it had to happen.
Britain in 1913 was still the richest nation in the world.
Yes.
It vastly had the biggest navy in the world, and it vastly had the biggest merchant marine in the world, and it obviously had the biggest empire in the world had ever seen. Still had. Even today, no empire's ever been as big as that. By 1918, Britain owed money to the Americans. Not as much as people think, by the way. Britain wasn't by any means bankrupt in 1918, but we did owe money, and we're nowhere near as rich. And we ended up by 1922 having a navy that was only slightly bigger than the Americans. And that was all a direct result of World War I. And of course, in the meantime, we lost 1 million of our best and bravest men.
Yeah, that was that's something that's really hard to quantify. The whole generation,
the geniuses and people who may have done great stuff, who got killed by German bullets in World War I to no great purpose.
Yeah, just to advance a couple of feet, you know.
And it's not even that, because that was like a function of military technology of the time. But basically, it was to save France. And I fail to see how France was a desperately important thing to Britain.
Yeah.
Like in 1870, we didn't go to war with Prussia over France. So why did we in 1914?
Yeah, the 1870 war is a very interesting one. I might invite you on to do actually a discussion of that, because
that would be an interesting book, an interesting stream. But if you do, you've got to read Alistair Horn's book about 1870 first.
Yeah.
If you already haven't, that is.
I haven't. I would definitely like to. I have read about, because one thing I was very interested about how Germany, how you had the process of German unification, beyond like the Holy Roman Empire and Habsburg.
Well, look, with that, you've got to look at Bismarck, who was a genius, and Bismarck was also good because one of the things Bismarck had two things he would never do. He wouldn't do a two-front war. So you either had to be friends with Russia or France. You couldn't be enemies with both, according to Bismarck. And the other thing Bismarck would never do is he wouldn't get into a big war with the British Empire.
Yes. Well, this is the thing, is that you have to remember that, and this is something that's never talked about, the British and the Germans at that point, before World War One, viewed themselves as brothers.
Yeah, I mean,
the people on the ground.
The German states had mostly been British allies prior, well, certainly up until 1850.
Yeah, especially like places like Hanover.
Hanover was run by, obviously, the Hanoverian British kings. So, but absolutely. We weren't enemies. I mean, if you look at the Napoleonic Wars, Prussia was a British ally more often than not.
Yeah, Russia. I mean, the only ally that we had, which was a bit that sort of flip flopped, and we organised a hit on the Tsar, one of the Tsars, in St. Petersburg, was of course Russia, because
Russia was quite often a British enemy, for different reasons. But I mean,
but we organised an assassination on their Tsar, didn't we? And,
I don't know if we did that, to be honest with you. I think that might be exaggerating a bit, but I would say that there were British and Prussian regiments in 1914-18 who had the same battle honours on their colours. From the Napoleonic Wars, for example.
So, in Waterloo, definitely you had
Waterloo and other campaigns too. But so I think hopefully that might be interesting for people.
That'd be a good discussion. But no, thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on, indeed,
mate. Thank you very much for inviting me. If you do something historical, I'm always interested.
That'd be great. I might invite like maybe John Cavalier, because he's also interested in that sort of stuff as well.
Cool. Yeah, John's great. I like John. He comes on my streams occasionally. So yeah.
Yeah, cool. And I might even I'll see if anyone else is like about, because also there's quite a few like historical. We're both of us. I'll just show very quickly. Apostolic Majesty's Discord.
Yeah, he's good.
Discord. It's a Discord. It has he talks a lot about he frames it in two things. You have like the successors of Orthodoxy and the successors of Charlemagne, and then you have there's also like a subgroup if you're interested in like Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth lore and Lord of the Rings stuff. He's got a whole like sub.
He's starting a series on that stuff, which is good because Tolkien was writing a mythology which was deliberately for England and Britain.
Yes, and Bilbo, you've missed it. Yeah, I'm going to bed now. So you can catch up. I guess you can catch up after the stream.
You can still watch it. It's not going down, is it?
Yeah, it's not going. I'm now going to delete the stream, everyone. Good luck. And no, it's going to be up there. It's going to be up there. But I need to get off to bed because I'm absolutely shattered now.
Yeah, I don't blame you, mate. And I've got some stuff to do too. So thank you very much for having me on. And
that's all right.
if you do something historical, great. I'm happy to reappear at some stage. So go on.
That's all right. Thank you for coming on, and I hope you had a good morning with all this. And good morning to all our Australian viewers that we seem to have here, and good evening, good night to everyone else who's you regular viewers. And I'll see you all next time. Check out the Wellington Project, and we'll see you again.